Kinexoko. Stunetaneko Apau Denekwan.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Maurice Manyfingers. I'm the president of Old Sun Community College on the Siksika Nation, and I am from the Blood Tribe, Ganekwan. And we're very happy that all of you are here this evening for the next part of our celebration of National Indigenous Peoples Day. I am honored to be your master of ceremonies for this evening's panel. I have been a member of the planning committee, the steering committee, led by the COO, Janice, and I've been very pleased to be part of that team, Janice. And we have had just a wonderful morning and afternoon with students from various schools in and around Calgary. I'd like to thank the Calgary Public Library in this beautiful facility for being a major partner in the planning this event today, and a huge thank you to the Government of Canada, Black Diamond Group, for helping sponsor this evening's panel discussions. We have many special guests in attendance this evening, and many visitors and guests watching via live stream they are participating remotely. National Indigenous Peoples Day has been designated as a day for all Canadians to recognize and celebrate the unique heritage, diverse cultures, and outstanding contributions of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. June 21st is the beginning of the solstice, the summer solstice, and it is very appropriate that we're having this celebration on June 21st. In cooperation with Indigenous organizations, the Government of Canada chose June 21st, the summer solstice, for National Aboriginal Day, now known as National Indigenous Peoples Day. So we would like to welcome everyone here. As part of our protocol within Siksikaitsitapi, the Blackfoot and Treaty 7, we always acknowledge, we will make a land acknowledgement, but to offer blessings and greetings to start our meetings in a good way. It is my pleasure to introduce Elder Ruth Scalplock, who is one of my employees, my elder in residence at Old Sun Community College. Ruth will bless our National Indigenous Peoples Day and all those present. Elder Scalplock is a Siksika First Nations woman, a published author, an elder in residence with Old Sun Community College, and has dedicated over 40 years of her life to helping her community members and urban Indigenous families. So, if I could ask you, if you could stand, and Elder Scalplock, if you can offer our blessing.
Okay, excuse me. Good evening. I was here this morning to open our very important event. Our speaker, Dr. Chief Wilton Littlechild. He was here this morning. He had to head back to Edmonton. And what he shared about the residential school, some issues triggered because I went to a Catholic residential school in Siksika for 14 years. And there I really suffered all forms of abuse. And it took me a long time to find a path of healing. March the 15th, 1974, I gave my life to the Creator. I had to heal from the Catholic Church. I really had to work on what I went through. It's painful. Even today, I'll never totally heal. There's always something that gives me a trigger. Thank God I've got those skills. I have that personal way of healing within myself. And giving my life to the Creator has helped me so much, especially giving my life to Him. I help people from all walks of life. And just to let you know, Wilton Littlechild spoke about violence against women. I really worked hard to get the Awutan shelter going in Calgary, along with Dr. Morris Manyfingers, his aunt Jerry, and Jerry Manyfingers. It took us a long time to get the shelter going. I don't want to have to go into what we went through, but when you believe in something, especially from here, you know things do happen, especially for the benefit of people. And I always like to mention my late brother Ralph Klein was very instrumental getting the shelter going, and it's still in operation. I think it's 26 or 27 years in operation for our women. But they take other women from Calgary, so I always thank my Creator. I found Him. When I first sobered up my recovery, I went to all these different denominations, Mormons, name it. None of them could do some justice for me until I went back to my traditional Siksika way. And it's a beautiful life to be in recovery, to help people, and the list goes on. And I'm always so happy when I'm asked to say a prayer or even to do a workshop. And I do so much work, and it's endless, but it's not about me. It's about the Creator. I always have to stop and do inventory. Am I doing the work? What not? And it's so important to acknowledge Him throughout the day. I was just over in the northwest at High Banks. They had a ceremony. They have a native name for their program, BTAC, Eagle Women, and they help women from all walks of life. I just rushed from over there because when I make a commitment, I always like to follow through, especially helping our people. And then when my boss here, Maurice, asked me to be an elder today, I told him, oh, by all means, because that connection with the Creator, it's so beautiful. If I didn't have Him in my life, I wouldn't be here today. And I always appreciate my husband. He's not here, he's out. I think he went to Fort Calgary, and there's so many different events happening in the city, and I really appreciate federal government and all these people that they designated this day for our people. So many people are not here today, especially the survivors, the elders who never had the chance to do some healing. It's tough to look at your hurt and pain, but you've got to have that courage. You have to deal with that trauma, generational and intergenerational, because there was so much that happened to us. That's how come whenever I'm asked to go help, I always like to be there, because it's for the future of our young people, and also us First Nations people. we really have to take that responsibility to do some healing, to let go. I'm so thankful. I came to terms with my Creator every day. I couldn't smudge this morning at the hotel, but I prayed for that meeting this morning. And I prayed again at that ceremony this afternoon. And I really do appreciate different programs, different people helping our people, because there's so much pain out there. That's how come we see our people on the streets, stemmed from way back. So I appreciate all of you. I really mean it. And of course the library, working with it's at the Canadian Sports Hall of Fame. It's really good, and we have to continue making relationships to really make our country a better place to live. And also those relationships have to be genuine. Not just say you are, but please mean it from here. There's a difference. With us First Nations, we operate from here, not up here. So I encourage all of you. I appreciate coming to spend the evening, the panel. I'm looking forward to it. So at this time, I'm going to say the prayer in my Blackfoot language. Ayus te beita piop nistuan na ko kawutan aki ano ka muktia kutomo pinnan ni dapat tu tama pi kino nis te beita piop kinukkitsipu tuk tahkuhkaspomos matapik sai onoksikimo kinnan nokkitsepsta pessitano napiuyes tajakitsepsta pinnan ai onoksikimo kinnan nitsitapi minnanex nitsitapiks annohka atakoi ika kakawayamos kotakutsipu ihpia kinnones tipeitapio nohkitu tapessitau tahkitaumanes tohpukapu takimanna napikoeks kiamokska assineicoix kiamokska nokkitapiks kitskanoaja kinnones tipeitapio ni tapu tutamapsia tahkukohpuka puutaki miessennään. Aionoks pomokinään nohkatakui kinnoonesti peitapio. Käämoksihka noutuiksi kinnoonesti peitapio. Nohkatukanoksihkua ja vanikkaneissukappi. Aionoksi kimmokinään. Kenoksi kokksi tämspinnään. Nitukanoutuksennään. Anhukan Kinohkanesta poukamanesta nohkatakui kinnoonesti peitapio. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elder Scalplock, and it has been a total pleasure working with you this year as elder in residence. So thank you for joining us this evening. At this time, I'd like to introduce the Chief Executive Officer, the CEO of the Calgary Public Library, who runs this beautiful facility. Please give a nice warm welcome to Sarah Mueller.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Sarah Mueller, and I'm the CEO at Calgary Public Library. And on behalf of the library, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you here to tonight's panel discussion on the role of sport on the path to reconciliation, delivered in partnership with Canada's Sports Hall of Fame, Black Diamond Group, and of course, Calgary Public Library. To begin our program this evening, I want to acknowledge Moginstis, the lands where the Elbow and the Bow Rivers meet. It's in the spirit of truth and reconciliation that we recognize the ancestral territories, cultures, and oral practices of the Blackfoot people, including the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai First Nations. We recognize the Iitka Stoney Nakoda Nation, including Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley, and we recognize the Dene people of the Tsuut'ina First Nation. The city of Calgary is also the traditional homeland of the historic Northwest Métis and is home to Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. Calgary Public Library serves the community on this traditional land, and we honor all people who share, celebrate, and steward the Treaty 7 territory of southern Alberta. This land acknowledgement reminds us of the histories that precede us, highlights our responsibilities going forward, and helps bring us all together on a shared journey of truth and reconciliation. The library is here to give everyone access to stories that entertain and instruct. We learn through story, and the library is a community hub where everyone can come together to learn and share ideas. Canada's Sports Hall of Fame is Canada's only national museum of sport, educating on the values, history, and culture of sport in this country, celebrating Canada's sports heroes who have reached the pinnacle of their careers and are going beyond the win, making monumental contributions to our society. Tonight, on National Indigenous Peoples Day, we're honored to host a panel of Indigenous athletes who've gone beyond the win, and they're joined by other important players on the path to truth and reconciliation. I get to introduce some of them now. Tonight we have with us Hall of Famer Sharon Firth, who applied the lessons that she learned while living a traditional Gwich'in way of life with her family to achieve monumental success with Canada's cross-country ski team. She and her twin sister Shirley Ann competed in 4 World Ski Championships, 4 Olympic Winter Games, and were members of the National Cross-Country Ski Team for an unprecedented 17 consecutive years. Kendra Jessie Rosychuk is a Cree and Ukrainian woman from Sucker Creek First Nation. Kendra is a fancy shawl dancer, certified fitness trainer, and wellness advocate, with over 15 years' experience playing competitive ice hockey and a bachelor's degree in sports management. She works to inspire future generations and reclaim space for Indigenous people and their voices within the wellness and sport industries. James Lavallée is a 3-time Canada Summer Games medal-winning canoe-kayak sprint Métis athlete and the Tom Longboat Award recipient. Lavallée was also a member of the 2019 Canadian delegation to the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, where participants from around the world discussed how to generate, transmit, and protect traditional knowledge. Shannon Dunfield wears a number of hats, including President of Indigenous Sport Council Alberta, an Aboriginal Sports Circle member organization, President of the North American Indigenous Games Council, Vice President for Métis Local 1990, and co-chair for the Grand Prairie Aboriginal Circle of Services. In both education and health, and is currently the manager for Indigenous Health and Diversity for Alberta Health Services North Zone. We also have with us Scott McLeod, a proud member of the Songhees Nation, located on the southern tip of Vancouver Island. Scott has built a career working in Indigenous relations and community and business development for over 15 years. Scott's passion continues to provide valuable contributions towards economic reconciliation, capacity development, and increased sustainability in communities. And Janice Smith has worked in the sport museum field in Canada for 38 years and is currently the Vice President and COO of Canada's Sports Hall of Fame. She was instrumental in the creation of the Indigenous Sport Heroes Education Experience, an IndigenousHeroes.ca online digital book. She is passionate about the importance of the role sport plays on the road to reconciliation. Please join me in welcoming this distinguished panel this evening.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I must say your Blackfoot's pretty darn good. So, I am pleased to now welcome to the podium our moderator for this evening's panel discussion, Mr. Paul Karchuk. Paul is the host of Daybreak Alberta, the province's weekend morning show on CBC Radio 1. Before taking over the reins of Daybreak Alberta, Paul was the director of the Calgary Eye Opener, having spent time as the associate producer and technician on the show. He brought his love of skiing and the outdoors to the airwaves with his weekly Real Ski Report and summer outdoor reports. Please join me in offering a nice welcome to Mr. Paul Karchuk.
Thank you all. It's lovely to see you here. I feel we should welcome our panel up. Please have everyone, a round of applause for the panel, please. And thank you, Dr. Manyfingers. And what an amazing panel to have here for National Indigenous Peoples Day. It has been stacked, as you heard, and it's great to have them all here. And I feel we should just get into this because we're gonna have to take a break at 20 after, have a little stretch out. But the whole point of the panel is to, and it's in big letters right up there, ask the question: the power of sport and reconciliation. So. I feel as though let's get to it. Let's ask that question of each of the panelists and hear your various points of view on this. Starting with Sharon Ann. Love to hear your thoughts on this. The power of sport and reconciliation.
The power of sport and reconciliation. Oh my goodness, that's ginormous. I think it's really important that we start the children off once they start crawling, because they even start competing when they crawl. They have their friends together and they just give her. And it's done in a fashion where they're having fun and they're laughing, and they even hug one another when it's all over. And then it goes on to walking and playing. You bring them to the playground and they just don't want to come home. They just want to have fun. So as they develop into children and young adults, the toughest time in their life, teenagers, how do we keep them? So teenage life, we know what that was like. We were so messed up, and we figured it out somehow. So with these gems of young people, it's so important to instill in them the love of life, the love of sport, the love of family, the love of school, the love of playing and meeting people from all walks of life. Because today we live with so many different cultures, and it's really important that we say who we are and mean what we say, speak the truth, and just enjoy life to the best of your ability. And then when you do things, again, to do to the best of your ability. And I think that's one of the roles of sport and the path onto reconciliation, because that's a big word. My husband and I had so many discussions about what that word meant and how we could apply it to people we meet, because we have the beautiful gift of speech, and we can share those fine words with people that we bump into and make it so interesting that they even want to come home with you. That's it.
Kendra, Jessie, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I personally think that sport, it has a really big role in reconciliation, and I think there's a lot of power in sport, and for myself, sport has always been really good medicine in my life, but I was often made to feel like I didn't belong in the sports spaces that I was in. Like I was told, oh, like, you know, you're like Native shouldn't be playing here, or just things like that. And I always was kind of felt like I didn't belong, or I shouldn't be there. And so, so I have a degree in sport management, and so I've learned a lot about just the history that Indigenous people have in modern day sports and all the contributions they've made. And for myself growing up, I never heard that, I never knew that part of our history. And so I think that's just educating people on Indigenous people's contributions to sport can play a really big role in reconciliation, because I know, like myself, many other Indigenous youth and athletes have had many experiences where there's a lot of racism in the sport that can drive athletes out of the game, because it's like you just feel like you're not safe, you don't belong, and you shouldn't be there. And so I think just educating on just all the contributions that, you know, our ancestors have to sports, like even for myself, like I have learned that. So I grew up playing hockey for over 15 years, and like I learned that the Mi'kmaq people from out on the East Coast were the first manufacturers of hockey sticks. And so I just grew up, you know, feeling like I didn't belong in hockey. But I think, you know, if youth were to know that and know that Indigenous people had really important roles in developing sport, and, you know, even a game like hockey, there's so many Indigenous youth who play hockey, and there's so many Indigenous fans. And so I think knowing just things like that and educating would help our youth a lot to stay in sport and just feel like they belong and that they should be there and they deserve to take up space and compete, and not feel like, you know, they're not good enough or they shouldn't be there. So I think just sport has a really, really just powerful role in reconciliation, and I think it's important to just educate our youth. A message I really try to share with Indigenous youth is that our ancestors were athletes, because I never had people tell me things like that when I was growing up. I always heard really negative, horrible stereotypes about Indigenous people, so I really try to share with the youth, like, just, you know, your ancestors were athletes, they were strong, hardworking, knowledgeable people, and so those are kind of my thoughts.
You have your choice of microphone there, Shannon.
I was trying to decide, and first of all, I just want to share, I'm not an athlete. I'm a mom and an advocate. Oh, I knew he was going to shut it off on me. Okay, does that one work? Okay, I was sharing, I'm not a mom, I'm not an athlete, I'm a mom and an advocate, and I'm just really feeling very blessed to be here tonight amongst these amazing athletes and change makers. And I want to say thank you to our elder for the beautiful prayer, both this morning and this evening, as well as the honor to be here today with and listen to Chief Dr. Wilton Littlechild. And but as Sharon said, the reconciliation is such a big word, and I think if I'm going to simplify it, it's creating spaces for all of our children and all of our youth to be able to participate in sport, to be able to be part of any activity or any games that they want to be part of. And that's the work that I've been doing, as being an advocate and a mom. And, you know, when I started in this, it was because I'm a mom, and I wanted to create spaces for my kids where my kids would be able to have access to sport and recreation. And one of the things I will say about my home community of Kelly Lake, BC, is that we were very fortunate to have some really amazing teachers that really instilled in us, you know, being active. And, you know, I say I'm not an athlete, but I did grow up playing basketball and running and all that wonderful stuff. But sport, for me, helped me finish school. Sport, for me, I lived 35 to 55 minutes out of where I went to high school. And there were times, I tell my children, there were evenings where, you know, my dad worked, and I would be sitting in a restaurant till 9, 10 o'clock at night after practice, waiting for him to pick me up, or waiting for one of my family to pick me up, because we didn't have that kind of access, but my family made it work. And I think that's the important piece, is as parents and as advocates, that we make it work. My husband and I made the decision to move to Grand Prairie because when our children are younger, because we wanted to give them opportunities that they wouldn't have in our smaller communities. And as parents, we make those decisions, and then over the years, it just grew. And you advocate for your kids, but then you start advocating for other youth and other children and other. It's just, reconciliation is so big, but I think that's the simplified version, is creating the space for all of our youth to be able to participate in sport, because sport, as Chief Wilton Littlechild said this morning, saves lives.
All of that. Yeah. Tanchkiwao, and thanks to our elders for the prayer this morning. I'm happy to be here, and thanks for the invite. So I'm a paddler. Paddling is inherently Indigenous. And so I come from that perspective. I didn't grow up playing other sports. I just paddled. And paddling for me helped me find myself, find who I was as a person, but also as an Indigenous person, and understanding what it really means to be a Red River Métis, and to grow up paddling on the rivers that my ancestors paddle on for centuries, is what helped me grow as a person, helped connect me to my community. So today in paddling, I was on the Canadian national team. I competed internationally, and the sport is very non-Indigenous. We have some true Indigenous paddling heroes like Alwyn Morris, Nadia Crossman-Serb, who have been elite international athletes in the sport. But it's largely been Canadianized. The canoe kayak at the Olympics used to be called the Canadian race. And when many people picture Canada, it's canoes and plaid, and trees and wilderness and all those things. So my perspective of reconciliation sport is a sport that's been stripped of its Indigenous roots. So a lot of my passion and effort right now is helping Indigenous people get back on the water and paddle, and to reclaim those spaces and have those opportunities so they can also reclaim their identities and their languages and their connections to the earth and all those other great things which save lives. And that's such an integral part of sport. But I would go further to say sport, recreation, and reconciliation. So how are we reclaiming all those spaces and learning from each other at the same time, and creating those connections in between communities? Because now we have a sport that is very non-Indigenous. So as we're working on reconciliation and connecting together again, and bringing back those Indigenous roots, that's what I see reconciliation in sport. I feel like I could go on and on and on about how I see that developing, and there's lots of work that's being done to make those connections. That's all I have to say for now, I guess.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you, Elder, for the blessing to start the evening as well, and it's an honor to be here today and sitting on this panel and speaking about something very important. Reconciliation, I think everybody has their own opinion or view on the word. It's a big word, like Sharon says, and how you look at it. To me, personally, my opinion on reconciliation and how do we get there is walking the path together, opening our arms, opening our hearts, learning from one another, Indigenous and non, as Canadians. So when you talk about the power of sport in reconciliation, sports open up so many opportunities and life skills training opportunities for anyone involved. I think you get an opportunity to learn leadership skills, you get accountability, team building, communications, and the list goes on and on and on, and those skills will continue to allow you to reconcile with others in that space. it also opens up a safe place for camaraderie and team members to come together and to learn from one another with no other outside opinions. You all have one goal as a team, and that is to win the champion or come first or whatever that may be. So through that, you're working on reconciliation and not even aware of it probably at a young age. So when you come out of that, I think your heart and you've grown without any of the negative stigmas that maybe many folks are coming out of and a lot of the healing that people are doing. So that's my opinion, and I know it may be different than others, but I think that sports is a huge, huge piece around mental wellness, and I think in order for us to reconcile as in unity and walk that path together, we need to be well, mentally healthy, with wide open hearts and minds. So I think sports plays a major contribution to that. And I am no way an athlete like these folks here either, but I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Well, I'm not an athlete either, but as you heard in the amazing introduction from Sarah, I have been working in the sport museum world for over 38 years in this country. I've had the honor and privilege of meeting an awful lot of individuals who have excelled in sport across this country. And for me, I've been learning over the last couple of years a lot about Indigenous world. We didn't know a lot, to be very honest, a couple of years ago when we started our 10-year plan towards sharing Indigenous stories. And so for me, it's been a huge learning experience. And I think as the National Museum of Sport, we have a huge opportunity to teach and share the stories of our Indigenous Hall of Famers, which is what we've been really working hard to do. We have 14 Indigenous Hall of Famers who've been inducted to Canada Sports Hall of Fame in our 66-year history, and adding another person in October. But it's their stories and their support. They have been teaching us the importance of their stories and how we can express across the country. And we're learning a great deal from each of them, and we're happy to share those stories. I'm going to refer back to Chief Wilton's presentation this morning as well, because he asked the question of the audience about what reconciliation is to them, and he had many conversation pieces, but the two that resonated with me was respect and relationships. And that's what happens in sport. You respect the people that you compete with, you play with, and you build those relationships and move forward in your sporting careers. So that's our first step forward towards reconciliation.
You know, it's something that James brought up, and we heard from others as well, the traditional importance of sport and competition in Indigenous culture. And I'm wondering if we can touch on that a little bit here now. This idea that long before the settlers came to Turtle Island, the importance and the power of sport and competition, whether we're talking about the roots of lacrosse, or we're talking about, from the Songhees people, Scott, canoe pull or high kick or paddling, as you've talked about, James. Can we talk about how essential sport and competition was through the millennia for Indigenous peoples? Sharon, do you want to take that first?
Want me to answer that?
Sure.
Well, let me think here. Okay, I think, in my humble opinion, as soon as you get kids playing together, they're automatically competing with each other, and it's fun, and it's really fun to watch them. We have these games back home in the Northwest Territories called the traditional games, and we bring, I think it's grade 4 to 12 together in Yellowknife, and they come from 33 communities. And with these games, these kids are playing, and they're having so much fun. There's so much laughter there, and that's what games is all about, to have fun. And if a child doesn't know how to do something, right, the other kids pull them aside and teach them. and it goes on with the Arctic sports too. You know, they're helping one another and discussing how they should do it. I don't find that in mainstream sport. You go to the Olympics and it's 1, 2, 3, and the rest are forgotten about. And with these kids, they shake hands with each other, you know, and when you have that handshake, it's bonding, it's for life. But you go to the Olympics, nobody shook my hand. Maybe because I didn't win the gold medal or the silver medal or the bronze, but I was there and I observe how people treat each other. And, you know, sometimes sports takes that away, takes that joy out of it, because we train just as much as everyone else. And some people get a little help by the doping scene, but I'm not going to even touch that stuff. So when it comes to sports, it's playing and seeing the joy that these young people display. And, you know, as adults, we're so happy to see that they want to come back, you know, and they want to play. And I was just so thrilled. I bawled my eyes out when I heard that the late Edward Lenny is being inducted this year. I know the family. We grew up together. And Edward was a visionary. He believed so much in the youth, like I did. And so we share something. And in our sport of cross-country skiing, even though it was an experimental sport to see if these Indian kids could get together and go to the Olympics, excel, you know, and I don't know why they even questioned that, if we can do that, because sport has always been part of our life. Skiing is not an Indigenous sport, but we had the endurance, we had the fun, we played, we showed up. We were the first ones there and the last ones to leave. And that's how much we love sport. And, you know, it's encouraging, like the lady here, the beautiful lady, mentioned about being a parent and how important it is to get the parents involved. You know, even if they show up once, well, my parent was here, you know, and that's the joy that resonates with kids, is to know that their mom and dad came. And, you know, it creates a foundation, it creates respect, it creates friendship, and I'm going to come back again, you know, and so, was that the question you asked?
Absolutely, that's great.
Yeah, so I'm sticking to that. And also with Edward Lenny, you know, he believes so much in youth that when they started bringing the games back, it was a discussion on the kitchen floor. And when you come into the kitchen, what do you normally do? Eat. So when you're eating, you're conversing and you're laughing, and, you know, and the joy of cooking, the joy of meeting people, the joy of bringing a group together. And I think that's one thing. If you ever watch Native people, they gut laugh. Seriously. You know, they have so much fun laughing, and then you laugh because the laughter is so contagious. And again, you know, you want to bring that into the sport. And with our team, the experimental ski training program, we were just reaping with that natural talent, the raw talent. And, you know, whoever had that vision of getting us on skis, bless that person's soul. And, you know, today that program no longer exists because they were all Native people, you know, that was skiing and excelling. And, you know, one of these days before I kick the bucket, I would like to see that program come back to life and, you know, maybe even go out there and teach them how to have laughter and fun in the sport and, you know, go to bed happy. You know, that's so important. Get rid of those demons, get rid of those bad things that happen to you, and have that security of knowing that we love one another.
Yeah, so I really agree with what Sharon said there and how sport has always been a part of our life. I think a lot of people, even myself included, like don't know all the like amazing and important contributions and roles that Indigenous people had in like developing and advancing like modern day sports. And even for myself, like, you know, there's even just a lot of Indigenous athletes that I never had the opportunity to like know about or learn about growing up. And even one example I like to bring up is Jim Thorpe, because I just learned about who he is like a couple years ago. And, you know, he's talked about as like he's one of the greatest athletes of all time, but, you know, he's never in the conversation. You know, you hear all about like Wayne Gretzky or Michael Jordan or all these other athletes, but you never hear about Jim Thorpe. And I think it's so important to just know that and know the history, and even just like, because with reconciliation, I think the biggest part of reconciliation is telling the truth and knowing the truth. And so it's important to honor that truth, and that all those contributions that Indigenous people had, and like not hiding that history or erasing that and like minimizing it, you know, having that be like aware, have people be aware of that, and to know that, I think is really important, because for Indigenous peoples, I think our cultures have always been rooted in movement and wellness, and it's important for, you know, our youth and for people to know that, because colonization has really, really tried to just minimize us down to nothing and really just misrepresented us as people. You know, there's so many negative stereotypes that exist about Native people, and I grew up disconnected from my culture, and I'm just like learning as I'm a young adult, and you know, I've been on my reconnecting journey for a few years now, and just learning more about, you know, the true history of Indigenous people, and just learning more about our cultures, and not those kind of surface level negative stereotypes that exist, because, you know, our way of life and our cultures and our people, it's a really, really beautiful way of life. And I think so many people don't have a good understanding of that, but I think just it's important for that truth to be honored in reconciliation.
Kendra, Jessie, before you pass the mic over, because I know it's something that Shannon has talked about too, but could you tell us the story of Jim Thorpe, for those who don't know it?
Yeah, so Jim Thorpe, I actually learned about who he was in university. It was a course I took called History of Sport in the US, and like I'm sitting there, I'm probably one of the only Indigenous people, and it's a first year course. The classroom is probably like double this size. It's full, like so full of kids, and I go sit at the very front, and it's the first class, and the prof is kind of just talking about all this, and I felt really emotional and just proud, because it was one of kind of like my first times in my life where I was like really just learning about this and hearing about this. But Jim Thorpe, from what I remember, he was an Olympic athlete for, I think it was like decathlon or something like that. And then he was also a professional football player, and I think professional baseball player. So he was a really all-around athlete, but you just, you know, you never hear about him when you're talking about like amazing athletes.
Shannon, I know that this is something that's been on your mind too, the story of Jim Thorpe, right?
Yeah, I know. So Paul and I talked about this the other day, because when we talked about, you know, what does reconciliation mean, and you guys heard the comment a couple of times tonight about Turtle Island. So as Indigenous people, we don't look at it as Canada and the U.S. We look at it as Turtle Island, and how important, you know, when we talk about somebody like Jim Thorpe is. And knowing, you know, Chief Wilton Littlechild mentioned him this morning, that he won Olympic gold, but it was taken from him because he got a couple, you know, some stipends for playing, you know, professional baseball. And there is a movement going on right now to, like a movement, you can sign a petition to get the Olympic Committee to give his family back his gold medals, because I believe it was the decathlon and the heptathlon, I think, if I'm correct. And so there is a movement to do that. I do understand that there was, that they did make him a co-winner, but the movement is to, you know, reinstate his gold medals for his family. And I think that's really important when we talk about reconciliation, and we talk about not just within Canada, but within Turtle Island, and how we can do that. Because, you know, you hear our young people like Kendra here, who, you know, that was her first knowledge of many of our Indigenous athletes, and how important that would be to help reconciliation move forward. So thank you for that.
You've introduced yourself as, you know, I'm a mom, I'm watching, you know, but you're involved with a lot of sport organizations as well, Shannon. I mean, we look here, the North American Indigenous Games, the Indigenous Sports Council of Alberta, the Aboriginal Sports Circle. You know, we talk here about the importance of sport and competition in Indigenous communities and Indigenous culture. So many of these sports and activities are being brought back to the fore through organizations like the ones that you're working with. How important is that, do you think, in this sort of, talk of reconciliation in sport?
I think it's really important, and I kind of go back a little bit to your first question about the cultural piece, right? And, I would be remiss if I didn't mention about the North American Indigenous Games and how it's not just about the 15 sports in the games. Culture in every year that we do the North American Indigenous Games, it's huge. Nobody likes me. This microphone doesn't like me today. But culture is such a huge part of the games every single time. And the ability for us to, like next year we're in Chibuktuk, which is Halifax, Nova Scotia, and how amazing it's going to be for our athletes from across Turtle Island to be able to learn about the Mi'kmaq heritage and the Mi'kmaq culture. And, next in 2027, sorry, here's my little plug, Alberta, BC, Saskatchewan, Northwest Territories and the Yukon have the ability to apply to host the games for 2027. So if we are lucky enough to get it here in Alberta for 2027, how amazing would it not be to, highlight our Indigenous people and our Indigenous cultures here? And I'm just, the role of culture in sport is, as Sharon was saying, it's prevalent in who we are, in what we do. And you know what, I don't want to take up too much more time because I know there's others, but I will say this is, I am that mom that takes her drum when my boy's playing college volleyball, and I am that mom that will pound her drum when my boy has a hit or when the team makes a point. Because I remember when we got our boy a drum and it has their logo, their college logo on it, and I'm that mom that pounds that drum every single time, because that, for me, I want my son to hear that when he's on the floor. I want him to hear the heartbeat of Mother Earth when he's on the floor. I want him to know that we are there and we are supporting him and we are proud of him and his team. And so that's part of culture and sport.
Mm-hmm. Double the volume.
Yeah. So in terms of your first question there about the role of culture in sport, to me, culture in sport and many Indigenous cultures is inseparable. Like for my nation, what wasn't a competition? Like what wasn't made into a game? A huge part of our traditions is jigging, the Red River Jig. We're known for that. And that's been a competition since the beginning of our nation, that we've been jigging and competing against each other, but having fun. And that was a way of gathering people together, having a kitchen party, pushing the tables and chairs aside in the room, and getting everyone together to laugh and dance, to compete. And it's community building. And what is reconciliation if it's not community building and reconnecting? So they're all intertwined. It's like if we talked about language and culture, Indigenous peoples, we can't separate those. Those aren't singular entities. So culture, sport, reconciliation and recreation sound too similar, they're tongue twister, but those are all one and the same in my opinion. And it was the same with paddling and rowing. Métis were big York boat people. It's like, if you haven't seen those, you look it up. They're really cool. They're giant Viking ships, but I'm a boat nerd, so and they use those to transfer furs from Winnipeg to York Factory, where a lot of my family is from. But you weren't considered a man until you'd done that trip. You'd gone all the way down the lake, and they would compete what boat would be the fastest, who would get there first. They had all their log times of the fastest trips, and that's all in records that we can see today. So it's that fun and that camaraderie is inherently Indigenous to me. It's inherently part of my culture. So I hope that answers the question.
Absolutely. How do you win a Red River Jig?
Definitely not. No.
No, you're not going to do it for us?
One day. Someone said they wanted to jig. Is that what I heard? It's not me, but so a Red River jig. There's changes. So if you ever listen to the song, why is it the Red River? The Red River jig, right? Yeah, I was like, what's the, yeah. There's changes. So there's certain parts of the song that are like faster, and so during that part you do a fancy step. So it's called a change. And so the competitions would last until you ran out of different steps to do. So it would be whoever jigged the best or whoever had the most steps would win. So sometimes, like at competitions now, they might do 3 changes or 5. And whoever has the nicest footwork. And
You need a deep repertoire.
you do. I've heard stories of people having 20, 30 different steps that they do. So you jig for a very long time. So I think there's someone doing their research on jigging and like how great of a physical activity. The premise is that they think it's the best. It probably is because it's Métis, but but as like a great way to be fit and build community and do all these other great things. And this morning, Chief Littlechild was talking about balance, and that's what I think of, and especially in these community events like a jigging competition, a paddling competition, or different communities in Manitoba anyways have treaty days where they'll do flour packing and all these other tea boiling. But you're bringing people together, and that's so integral to building community, reconciliation, and all those sort of things, and having that balance of like the physical activity, but all that, the mental challenge, like focusing on your task and the mental health, the community and the spiritual, and all those other elements that we talk about, and being balanced across that. So,
okay. Scott.
Well, how do you follow that? All these folks.
That's right.
So I do not jig, and I will not get up and do a jig right now, even with the training. I'm going to talk about the canoe pulling, like you mentioned. So being Salish, I grew up in community till I was 17 before I moved away. Canoeing was a way of life for the Salish people, for the West Coast First Nations. It was the way we hunted. It was the way that we fished. It was the way that we survived. We traded. It was a way to get around. It was just a way of life. We lived on the water for the most part. When it ties into kind of how that cultural piece and that component now, I moved away a long, long time ago, and I've been here in Alberta for 20 years, kind of on and off. But when you go back now and you see how competitive canoe pulling is with Indigenous people, with the First Nation people, the Salish people, and you see the crowd that it draws, it brings people from all walks of life that come out to these events now, and it is an actual cultural ceremony that gets tied into that. So you see the young kids from newborn all the way up to young adults, and then your elders are there too, taking part in that, along with the rest of the community. All non-Indigenous people are there supporting it and learning the way of life of West Coast Indigenous people. So I think that I think there's a huge cultural component to that in sharing and reconciliation. It's a really fun thing. It was a way of life, and it's kind of a sport now, but it's also a way of sharing in a fun way in a safe place. So I think that's kind of where I'll leave that.
Fantastic. Here we are. We're 2 questions in, and we're already well past our break time. What would we like to do? Do we want to carry on? Do we want to take the break? How are we feeling? How's everyone doing? Keep going? Great. Okay, good. Well, what's that? Yeah, exactly. Here's a question. We've talked, and this is something that Sharon and you've talked about a lot, the importance of sport for youth. And I'd like to hear some stories, whether they are with youth you've worked with or personally yourself, how you have experienced the impact of sport in affecting the next generation. How important has that been for empowering Indigenous youth, for, as you've talked about, Shannon, Indigenous youth getting to experience, getting out of remote communities, whatever it may be, right? How important is this? Can we hear some stories from the panelists? Sharon, you're up.
You're asking me?
Yes, that's right.
Let me see, stories. Okay, when we grew up and we drifted from Aklavik to Inuvik because Aklavik was sinking into the Mackenzie River and Lavallée. And, the motto over there was never say die. So when we moved to Inuvik, we were, all the native people were in the West End and segregated. The non-native people were in houses in the East End. So we never mingled, we never played together, but we sure had fun in the West End. Us kids were in our little neighborhood there. We played baseball, we played basketball. We didn't have the hoops or whatever they call it. We played dodgeball. We had one bike that we all learned to bike on and learned how to double ride one another, and we had relay races. We had, like a real healthy community playing together. And that developed into bigger competitions. And I never ever in my life heard of the Olympics. Next thing, I was on my way to Sapporo, Japan, 1972. And that was a real eye-opener on how small this world is, but how lovely it was to see culture in all the games. And my culture was taken away from me when I was in residential school. And in fact, when I was speaking this morning, I talked about the beautiful clothing that my wonderful mother made with her hands. We didn't have the electricity, so everything was handmade. And when we went to residential school, all our clothing that my mom made with every stitch was love in it, and you could feel it, because that was our security blanket. That was our security to our language, our culture, our people. And when that was taken away, like we just basically failed at everything. And it's just been recently that I started making my own traditional clothing. And when I put it on, I went to my beloved sister and said, do you think they're gonna beat me if I wear this? Do you think they're gonna rip it off me when I wear this? And it was a real fear in me, because that was who I am. I'm that traditional person. I'm Gwich'in, and everyone else is itching to be Gwich'in. So, I was really, really afraid, because so many of our communities in the Mackenzie Delta and all the 63 communities at that time went to Inuvik, and we had two residential schools. One was Anglican and the other was Roman Catholic, and there was a utilidor that separated us, and we couldn't play together unless we snuck over the utilidor or underneath it to play with one another. But when we did that, we got beatings for it, and we're just people that want to have fun. We're young kids that want to play with each other. And some of these families, the amazing work that their mothers did for them, with the beautiful moccasins, the beautiful dress, the beautiful parkas, the fur. We never heard of faux fur. This was the real stuff that our parents, they lived it, they dreamt it. It was our way of life to dress your kids. The mothers always dressed the husbands the best. And they had the most incredible parkas with Wolverine trim, And my mom had beautiful parka with the sunburst, which is a big ruff around your head with Wolverine trim. And, we'd be walking together as a family. And then you can know which family was the best hunter and trapper by how the parents dressed your kids, and it's like fashion show, Paris runway, New York City runway, Milan, Rome, Brisbane, and how would I know that? I lived in the bush. I lived on my parents' trap line, and yet we were fashion people. We had beautiful colors. My parents did beading, and they sewed with silk, and like I said, all hand. So, what was your question again?
What's that?
What was your question?
The question was about, stories of youth being empowered by sport.
Okay. So it's not only sport, okay, it's culture. And, the color, look at this beautiful lady here. And that's how we were. People knew my mother's beading. They knew my mother's flowers. They knew the Delta braid. Sachs Harbor, you knew which person had the best polar bear hide, the best muskrat, and the juicy tails that we ate. That's culture and sport hand in hand, and it's nothing to be ashamed of until we went to residential school, and they made us feel like our clothing was just nothing but trash, because that's what they did for ourselves. And it took many years to build ourselves up. And even when we traveled, I didn't want to wear a parka. I didn't want to wear anything cultural because so much shame was brought to us. And now you try to rip this dress that I made, and you better watch out. Seriously.
Was skiing?
But I'm not gonna, I promise I won't get violent.
Was skiing, Sharon Ann, almost a form of escape from residential school?
Oh, that's a really good question, because we had a choice. We had a choice to either go skiing or we could stay inside and get whatever they do to you. And I'm a survivor, both of residential school and Indian day school. And to be really honest, I just hated school. I hated learning. I hated reading. Just everything about it that was supposed to be fun. Because when you're learning something, you're going to school, you're learning how to speak properly, because we couldn't speak our language anymore. And with cross-country skiing, it was an escape. It was an escape to be on the tundra, in the bush, and still playing with our friends. And the priest at the time, he was removed because he didn't do your Hail Marys or whatever you had to do. And but he loved the outdoors, so he just told us to go and have fun. So that's what we did. And it took a lot of guts on our part and determination. And so what if they hit us? It's just another one. So you learn how to endure the pain and the suffering. But when we were on our skis, it was like we were on the Winnipeg National Ballet. Just so beautiful and graceful. And people looked at us, just like you mentioned. Who's Mr. Thorpe? Well, Molly of Denali asked the same question. Who's Sharon Firth? So again, it's really important for our country to promote these Indigenous people. Our population is 38 million, and there's how many people that are Indigenous in the Canada Sports Hall of Fame? And this lady here mentioned Wayne Gretzky. And hockey. Hockey, what's hockey? You have Indigenous people out there playing, and they're called wagon burners, and just horrible things. And is that fun for sport? So as Canadians, we got to pull up our socks and smarten up and start treating people with respect, and especially the Indigenous people. And the same for us. we have to learn to work together in peace and get along and make sport what it's supposed to be, fun. And if you want to have some good laughs, come home with me.
Yeah, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about how sport has really empowered me, because I've heard a couple of the panelists. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to be here for Chief Wilton Littlechild's kind of talk earlier, but I heard some of the panelists talk about how he mentioned that sport saves lives, and I can really resonate with that, because honestly, I don't think I would be here if it weren't for sport. And I probably wouldn't have graduated high school if it weren't for sport. I probably wouldn't have gone to university if it weren't for sport. Like, sport has really always given me an identity since I was like a young kid. I was a hockey player, I was a dancer, I was a runner. It always gave me an identity because I grew up disconnected from my culture and I didn't have an identity for very long. Being an athlete was a really, really big part of my identity. And it wasn't until I got older when I started to reconnect and relearn who my culture and that part of my identity, because for so long I lived without that part of my identity, and just being an athlete was a really big part of my identity and just who I was. And that's really, it helped to give me a lot of just really good life skills. Also, it built my confidence. I was always such a shy young little girl growing up. I had a hard time even asking my friends if I can go sleep over and stuff. I'd be getting my mom to ask them if I can go. I was really shy, so sport really built my confidence also, because I was a pretty good athlete and I was always one of the better players on my team. So it gave me a lot of confidence, I was contributing to something, and something that was bigger than myself, and I was doing something good. So sport really has just empowered me a lot in my life and on my journey, and it still does every day. Now that I'm not competing as competitively as I was when I was younger, I like to still refer to myself as I'm an everyday athlete training for life, because the sport of life, life is, it's hard every day to go through the motions and everything. So it's I feel for myself I need to be strong. I need to have a strong mind, a strong body, a strong heart in order to, go through this life and be able to manage all the challenges and the wins and losses that are going to come my way. So yeah, sport definitely, just for myself, it's really, really empowered me. And I talk a lot too about how sport is really empowering, and even just movement or physical activity, because oftentimes it shows you how strong you are, but it shows you that you're stronger than you think. There's been so many times in my childhood growing up where competing in sports or in games where sport has just really proved to me and shown me how strong I am. And I think that also just reminds me too about the ancestral strength that I carry.
Interesting how sport worked as a bridge back toward your Indigenous roots. Yeah. Shannon, as somebody who works so much with youth and various organizations and getting Indigenous youth into these various games and whatnot that you're involved in, what have you seen? What stories come to mind?
Oh, I have a few, and I just realized too, I don't stop. But one of my favorite stories is for Team Alberta for the North American Indigenous Games. I was mission staff for volleyball, and I was out recruiting everywhere, and we were getting ready because back then they did play downs, so each community can put in a team. So we put in teams from Grand Prairie, and so I'm recruiting and I'm helping getting my team, or the youth that are with me, saying, do you know anybody? And so this one young man, his name came forward, and so we talked to him, and he was going to come out, and he played for us, and we ended up winning the play down. So then that team was going to go on and represent Alberta at the 2017 games. But there was a bit of a hitch. He was a very talented athlete, was also a midget AAA baseball player. And then I got a call from Dad, and he said, my son wants to play for your team. I want him to play baseball. And he said, what are you going to do? And I said, I'm not going to do anything. That's your guys' decision. Because, I said, I'm not going to get involved in that. But just know whatever decision your son and your family makes, I'll support 100%, no matter which way you guys decide to go. The young man actually decided to play for us. Our team went on, the boys that team went on. They won silver first time at the North American Indigenous Games in 2017. He was recruited to play college, and now he's playing university. And I saw the mom not too long ago, and she said to me, she said, "I don't think you realize the role you played in that." And she said, just recruiting him and getting him here, and now my son is a university volleyball player. And she said, you helped put him on that path. And it gives me goosebumps, because there's a few other youth, and like I said, I don't shut down. I was even trying to recruit this young lady, this beautiful young lady next to me, to coach Team Alberta for the National Aboriginal Hockey Championships for 2023. So I'm really hopeful that she's gonna get that application in, because like I said, I don't shut down. I'm always looking for those youth that will help impact other Indigenous youth. Kendra is an amazing Indigenous role model, and when we look at our kids, that's what we look for, is who can be a role model out there, because that young man is now a role model for other youth. And when we went to the games, I had two our U19 ladies team, they won gold, and I had two of my team get recruited to play at universities in Ontario. So those are the stories that I carry, and I'm so incredibly proud of, because how do we say it? I'm an auntie to many. In our culture, we're aunties, and I'm an auntie to many, and it's a name I carry proudly. I actually bought myself a hoodie that says Big Auntie Energy from Res Life, just in case anybody wants to know where to get them from. But that means a lot to me, because I'm an auntie to many, and those many, I still help out now. Like, I just got a text tonight from a lady saying, my son wants to go to college. How do we where can we find funding? So I'm like texting him going, you can go here, you can go here, you can go here, you can go here. And that's the role I play, and it doesn't matter who they are. Even if I don't know them, but they know me through someone else, that's my job, and that's what I see is my role, to help them. But I have so many other stories to share. We have such amazing youth that we're just truly blessed. And like Kendra and Sharon and everybody sharing, like, we just got to create those spaces for them to be able to excel at what they want to do.
Mm-hmm. James, I mean, the programs you run, you must see some incredible stories of how paddling can reintroduce Indigenous youth to some of that heritage you talked about. What have you seen?
Yeah, so I don't know, did we talk about that earlier, what those programs were? No, okay. I have a terrible memory. So a couple years ago, I co-founded an organization called Waterways Recreation. We're a nonprofit based out of Manitoba. And with the desire of just helping Indigenous communities run canoe programs for their youth. So a lot of communities have canoes, they have paddlers, but to run canoe programs now, you need insurance and a lot of concerns around liability and certifications. And if you canoe, can you really safely bring out 20 kids on the water at the same time? So there's a lot that goes into getting a canoe program off the ground. So we're there to help that happen. And so I've had an amazing last couple of years in developing this organization, but also just going out to, I think I've been to 20 different communities now, running canoe programs, working with people in the community, different organizations in the community. But one amazing thing with paddling, and I've seen this in like mainstream, but also in like grassroots community paddling, is we attract people that do not come out to anything else. Every single time, I don't know what it is about paddling, but we get the people from, they're not weird, they're just just the ones that don't go to other things. It's not their thing. So I like to say that people tend to step into a canoe and out of their shell. And I see that time and time and again. One community I went to, I think 5 of the kids there, people were like, we have never seen these kids before. Like, they are inside, they might play video games, but we don't get them out to hockey, we don't get them out to art, but they're here paddling, and we didn't even hear them speak before, but now they're yelling and laughing, and tipping canoes and running after people to tip their canoe and splashing people, and it's amazing to see. But it's the power of paddling and the power of reconnecting and building community through this like inherently Indigenous activity. And what's nice is that like you go across the country, and you'll see different forms of paddlers, but I don't know of a single nation in this country that doesn't paddle. And we all kind of share that experience of being on the water. Maybe the boats are a bit different, but their uses are a bit different, but we share that. So in terms of like specific stories, there's a few. But so I was in this community, it's called Dog Creek or Lake Manitoba First Nation. And we had a lot of kids out. We worked with Jordan's Principle. I don't know if that's a thing elsewhere, but it's an amazing organization. And we had these kids who had never been on the water. A lot of them were kind of scared to go because it's a big lake and whatever. But we got them out and we were able to do the whole week. And you could just see the transformation from day one to Friday, where kids were timid and maybe not even really interacting, and you could kind of see, there's always like the cool kids too, and then the ones that were kind of scared of the cool kids. But by the end of the week, they're all together, they're all in the same boat, which is like such a cliche metaphor, but it's just how it is and how it works like every single time. And so as we left, a lot of these kids broke down and were crying because they knew they didn't have canoes in that community, so they wouldn't have that opportunity until the next year. And they hadn't, we always try and like role model like healthy relationships and like how to talk to kids, because a lot of kids who might not come from the best home life don't always have like healthy relationships with adults, and they have what we call a rigid script. They expect an adult's gonna yell at them or snap at them, but we build a space where they can make mistakes and they can goof around, and it's like totally okay, and we'll like get in there with them and like tip their canoe, and it's like a really great time. So we're like building those relationships, and those kids, you can see that in just 1 week of paddling. And so we have we're trying to develop more like permanent programming where we're kind of in there for like a whole year, and be able to build capacity within the youth to kind of like take on leadership roles in developing programs for their own community. So I've just been hearing amazing stories from that, and how kids that I was teaching 2 years ago how to just do basic canoe stuff and have a good time, who are now kind of like showing the younger kids, and like totally just steering away from all like the possible bad paths they can possibly get into. So they're learning how to steer the canoe, but they're learning how to steer their life in a positive direction and a healthy direction for their community too, full of canoe metaphors. But it's just how it is. It's hard to describe. And what I love about paddling is when I talk to non-Indigenous paddlers, they just get it. Like, paddlers just know the impact of being out on the water and the community building aspect. Mm-hmm. And for Métis-specific programs, which I always love to do, I try and get my local, it's kind of like our community government, and I try and get them all the people in my local out on the water every year. And so many people in Winnipeg don't have the opportunity to go on the river. It's like stigmatized, it's dirty, it's muddy, and unfortunately there's been a lot of like missing and murdered Indigenous women whose bodies have been thrown unceremoniously into the river, which is very painful and triggering for a lot of people. So we're reclaiming those spaces and making those our own again by using those waterways as a community in a traditional way. And their faces when they come off the water is just, it makes my life. It's what I live for, to see that. And so many got all these awesome women that come out with me, and then they come off the water and they're like, I feel like such a badass. I hope I'm allowed to say that. But like I was out paddling on the river, like it was scary and intimidating, but I just immediately felt connected to where I was in this place. And when you're on the water, if anyone's been paddling, you get a different perspective, like a literal different perspective of being on the water and seeing the riverbank, seeing your city or seeing the community. So those are my stories of how sport is and paddling, recreation is changing lives.
And it's something you've talked about as well, Scott. The power of the paddle. The question I wanted to ask you here, because we are just past time, so we'll have to kind of wrap things up, unfortunately. But from a corporate level, this is interesting because the Black Diamond Group does a lot for Indigenous communities, and you've seen the impact that corporate help can have on communities when you come in and supply equipment or supply trips or whatever. Can you tell us about what you've seen on that front?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're definitely here to talk about reconciliation and the power of sport. And I'm definitely fortunate to work for a company that does take sport quite seriously, and we invest and support and promote great initiatives such as Canadian Sports Hall of Fame's Indigenous Sports Hero Education Experience. I just want to step back for a moment and listening to all the stories that you share and the common themes, identity, the smiles on the faces, was it Volley Denali and the stories that you shared and your story with the volleyball, projecting, an Indigenous person all the way through to the university. That's the reason why we step behind these things, is the smiles on the faces, reducing those barriers for Indigenous youth to be part of a program. We take part in an annual golf clinic where we're able to reach out to networks and to supply clubs for the Indigenous youth to golf whenever they want. And we're out there, and I am not a golfer. I'm not much of an athlete by any means, unless cooking and eating is a sport, which I consider it might be. But the smiles on their faces, and when you work for an organization that will stand behind that, help eliminate those barriers, it can only provide great opportunity for those folks involved. There's a lot of sad stories out there. You talk about residential school, you talk about the trauma, the impact. I know all of us have probably faced all sorts of things, whether that be alcoholism, suicide, abuse, whatever it may be. And there's a lot of fear from our Indigenous young people, and they're our future leaders. And for them to see that smile on their face and to get that moment where they have accomplished something and they can say, aha, I've done it, I've done something. It can only provide a gateway to the next step in their life and maybe eliminate that, that rut that they're stuck in and maybe would not step out of otherwise. So. Hats off to Black Diamond. Honored to work for a company that supports initiatives like this and Indigenous youth and sport. But I think I'll leave it at that.
14 questions I had written down here. We got to 3. But that just shows you the depth here of this panel. I was so focused on the questions, Janice, I wasn't sure, how are we wrapping this up? Are we just saying goodbye? Are we having Dr. Manyfingers back on? What are we doing here?
Well, I think Dr. Manyfingers has a few closing remarks for everyone,
Excellent.
but I'm happy to mention a few things today. It has been an incredibly impactful day for all of the individuals who've been here since early morning, and I wanted to maybe close by sharing a really special moment we all got to share today as staff. It was one of the questions asked earlier today. We had Indigenous games that was being shared with all of the students. We had 250 plus students here today, and they all got to play Indigenous games. And then there was a little lull at the end, and I said, well, our team would love to play. So we had 14 of our team playing, including the old mother here who can't even get up off the floor, but I sat on the floor and we played Indigenous games together, and they taught us 3 different games, and it was just an amazing experience that we all got to participate in. So I think it's so important that we as Canada Sports Hall of Fame have that platform to help share the stories and the traditions, and with other individuals. Education is a huge part of what we do and what we offer across this country. So we're very privileged to be able to share those stories. So, and create partnerships with Black Diamond Group to help create the digital book that we've had on display here all day. So thank you to everyone for coming and being part of today. It was just an amazing experience. Thank you.
Sharon Ann wants the microphone. She says, bring me over the microphone. Here we go. Please, Sharon Ann, and then sure, Shannon.
Well, I would also like to thank Canada Sports Hall of Fame for making this possible. And also Black Diamond was very interesting and really heartwarming for me to be in your group and to know that, we are reconciling. And like the Orange Shirt Day where it says, each child matters, and they do. And each child matters in sport. Each child matter in education. So it's really important that we instill, peaceful, happy learning circles for kids. And when the 215 kids were discovered in Kamloops, I literally collapsed because I thought about my mom when we had to go away to school. Will she ever see us again? And look at all the mothers out there. Maybe they found their child. So we never ever in history want that to be repeated, and to know that we're humans. Indigenous peoples were strong people, we're resilient people, as Willie Littlechild says, and we're survivors. There's nothing in this world that is ever going to get in my way. And I'll do it in a peaceful way, and I'll put on my beautiful smile. Like they say, those Firth twins are drop-dead gorgeous. I'm going to stick to that, and hopefully give that positive message to young people. And on the other side of the young people is the elders, so always be available for elders. If you have elders in your family, sit down with them and talk to them. Ask them about their life. I'm sure they just have so many treasures and gems out there to tell you. And like my 98-year-old cousin said, give your head a shake. Those gems are going to come out. So try it and, send me a text, tell me if it works.
I just wanted to say a big hi and thank you to Canada Sports Hall of Fame and Black Diamond. I feel really honored and just blessed to be here, and just every time I get opportunities like this, I just think about like my little self as like a little girl who would have never like imagined myself ever doing anything like this, and I feel proud, and I feel like this is a really good step in reconciliation and like having Indigenous people, like giving them space to share their stories and have their voices be heard. I think is really, really important, and I just am feeling really grateful, and my heart is feeling really full also from hearing all the panelists and all your like really beautiful words and stories. I'm really, really inspired by all of you, but thank you so much.
No, thank you. I just wanted, I was thinking earlier about, I'm going to share a story with you guys. So I was raised by my kukum and my mushum, and my kukum, it'll be 20 years in September that she passed. And I share this story because it's kind of funny, but it grounds us in who we are. And when I went to convocation in 2013, I told my mom, I said, I want to wear kukum slippers. When my kukum passed, she was wearing these slippers. I actually have them on today. And I said, I want to wear kukum slippers. And she said, okay, well, let me find them. And a couple days later, my mom phoned me and crying, and she was so upset. She's like, I can't find them. They're not here. And like any good wife, she's like, your dad, you're blame my dad, any good wife. She's like, I blame your dad. He threw them out. I know he did. And I said, it's okay, Mom. I said, it's okay. I said, don't worry about it. It was, a couple days, about a week before convocation. We've got to fly to Victoria. And anyway, so a couple days before, I'm going to go pack. And what do I find on the floor in my closet is my kukum slippers. So I phoned my mom, and I said, Mom, You don't have to worry. I said, Cookham brought me her slippers. And she's like, what do you mean? I said, they're on the floor in my closet. She's like, how did they get there? And I said, Cookham brought them because she knew I wanted to wear them. And I wanted to share that story because there's this beautiful young lady from Cree Métis from Grand Prairie who has this, she does these affirmation cards. And one of the ones that stick to me so much and is so powerful is, we are who our ancestors waited for. And I think about that, and I think about me wearing my Cookham slippers, and because that's what I tell our youth is, you are who your ancestors waited for, because it's such a powerful message. Because it's our ancestors who have brought us to this point and who have brought us here, and it's our families and our connection to our culture and our communities. So thank you, and thank you guys too. Like, we didn't talk about it a whole lot, but allies are so important, and I just want to say thank you to the Canada Sport Hall of Fame for being such an amazing ally and creating this space and allowing us to be here to do that, and thank you to the Black Diamond Group for supporting this and being here today, and it was such an honor to meet all of you, and thank you so much to Paul for leading us in such a good way.
Well, Kachim RC. Thank you, everyone. It was great to be here today and to share a bit about what I think about sport and its role in reconciliation. Shameless plug, if you're ever interested in looking up waterwayscanada.com. It's our organization. You can check out some of our programs, and maybe if you want them here, we can make that happen. Maybe. So thank you, and thanks for the support from Black Diamond and Canada Sports Hall of Fame for the invite, and it's always a pleasure.
I might take you up on that York boat challenge these days. I'll start training. I just want to say thank you to everyone for coming today, and it's an honor to be here sitting on this panel of such highly recognized people here with such accomplishments in life and throughout your careers in sport. Thanks to Janice and the Canadian Sports Hall of Fame for all the hard work they've done as well putting this together, and thanks to Black Diamond for supporting this initiative as well. Thanks a lot.
I think round of applause for Sharon, Firth, Kendra, Jessie, Rosychuk, Shannon, Dunfield, James Lavallée, Scott McLeod, and Janice Smith, please. Thank you. And we'll have Dr. Manyfingers up to wrap things up. Thank you all.
Well, that almost concludes our evening events, but could we offer a nice round of applause for Paul for keeping the conversation going? I'm going to start listening to CBC rather than Jack FM now. And thank you to Canada Sports Hall of Fame, and thank you to our distinguished panel for being here. I know I learned a lot more about sport and character and being part of a team, which I think is very important in this whole role of reconciliation. So again, thank you to everyone for attending today. I just wanted to make one more acknowledgement for this event, actually two. One is the Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of Canada Sports Hall of Fame, Janice Smith. Janice, will you stand up, please? And let's give her a nice round of applause. So good to work with you. And also, I'd be remiss if I did not recognize my favorite announcer with TSN, the Chief Executive Officer of Canada Sports Hall of Fame, Cheryl Bernard. Cheryl, will you stand and be acknowledged, please? So, just in conclusion, thank you everyone for attending in person through the live stream this evening. A very big thank you once again to our panelists for this evening and sharing your thoughts on the role of sport and the road to reconciliation. This concludes our events for this evening. Please drive safely and have a nice rest of your evening. In our Blackfoot language, we say "Gaitamatsin." So all the best down the road. Thank you very much and have a wonderful evening.